In this episode, I'm joined by Nathali Zamora, a trailblazing advocate for Latinas living with endometriosis. Diagnosed at 21, Nathali has dedicated herself to breaking cultural stigmas and empowering her community through education and advocacy. Join us as we explore the intersection of cultural identity, resilience, and advocacy in the fight against endometriosis. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. I have a very special guest with me today, and I'm excited that she's here with me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in a minute, but welcome, Nathali.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Garner.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so excited that you're here. You're bringing such a much needed perspective to the discussion on endometriosis. So before we get started, I want to introduce you guys to Nathali a little bit more thoroughly. Nathali is a first-generation Salvadoran Honduran Latina. She is a passionate advocate for Latinas menstruating individuals living with endo. So, I mean, that's like, we're going to get into that because that's a huge topic. It's a huge population. And you were diagnosed at 21, right?
Yes, I was diagnosed at 21.
Yeah. So, Nathali's journey navigating the disease in the medical system inspired her to educate and support others facing this, what can be a very debilitating condition. You have a background in psychology, combining research and personal experience to empower others through self-advocacy and informed healthcare decisions. She bridges cultural gaps with a bilingual platform. That's on Instagram, right?
It is Endo Cipota.
Yeah. We are going to get into that because I want to make sure everybody can find you when we are when we shore up today, and a newsletter called the Chronic RBF. Her advocacy includes co-launching Latinas Con Endo and participating in initiatives like the Endometriosis Summit Español. Committed to creating systemic change, which is what it should be all about. Nathali is providing and building a nonprofit to provide Latinas with resources to better manage endometriosis and advocate for their needs. Welcome, Nathali.
Thank you.
So, I'm just going to just jump right into the deep end of the pool right away, because I think that a problem that we face globally, this is not an endometriosis problem alone, but the problem we face globally that seems for some reason it should be getting easier to address, but for some reason it's getting harder to address is diversity and representation. And so when I think about that related to endometriosis, my very first question was, how has your cultural background shaped your understanding and experience of endo? Because that must have an incredibly powerful impact, and one that I can't understand, but that I'm intensely curious about.
Sure. I love this question because I think a lot of times when I do talk about it, people's initial reaction might sometimes be, I understand too. I have endo. It's terrible. And it's like, absolutely. Like if you have a chronic condition or dealing with some sort of health issue, there's so much room for empathy for everyone. But I think that what can sometimes be missing from advice on dealing with a chronic illness or navigating illness is understanding sometimes that culturally there may be additional barriers, right? There's so many barriers already as women. There's so many additional barriers as maybe disabled people, ill people. So
you can have like a double, triple, quadruple, like you can have all of these barriers piling up after the already huge one of just being female.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, and that's all different for everyone, right? Like, and the conversations of privileges. And I think a lot of these words have become like so politicized, and we're not trying to call anybody out or make anybody feel bad. It's just more of, like, one of my privileges is I have a bachelor's degree. I navigate this space, with an education, which is something that some people just don't have. So culturally, it's important to talk about specifically where my family is from. So Latina, Latinos, Latinx is an umbrella term. It's a term that tries to encapsulate so many different countries in Central and South America. And it's impossible to do that. All of those countries are so unique. They're so different. We all speak the same language primarily, but it is culturally very different. And so I am Central American. My parents are from El Salvador and Honduras. And these are two countries that have been murder capitals in the world at different times. El Salvador specifically is the part of my culture that I'm very much in tune with. I used to travel there every summer, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other first generation people that are listening that can relate to. You kind of grow up in two worlds. You might speak two languages. You might still go back to the home country. The food that is from those countries is still being cooked in your home. Your parents are speaking that language, and so I grew up with you know, Britney Spears and singing pop music, and I also grew up with the Shakira that I know, right, singing in Spanish growing up. So I had two worlds going on in my head all the time, and many different influences, and also just seeing how people live outside of the United States, first and foremost. So my father is from a very rural area. He grew up on a farm. And so every summer, like I was a kid from Brooklyn going to help with milking the cows every summer, right? So it gave me just a very different viewpoint of the world and I think appreciation for how hard people work in El Salvador and how hard people work here and how different it can be. And so with that being said, we talk a lot about intergenerational trauma and experiences. You know, my father was escaping civil war. The 80s was a time where the government and homegrown movements, right, guerrilla groups were fighting each other for control, and he experienced some really terrible things, and he had to make the decision that nobody wants to make, which is that he had to leave his home to survive. And the United States would give him the opportunity to send money back to his family and help them. So my father was initially undocumented. He later met my mother, who did come here on a student visa from Honduras. Also grew up in extreme poverty, and they came from very difficult situations. But as soon as I got here, they just worked really hard. I don't think I have ever not seen my parents busting their behind. And that's something that they really taught me, is that, and if you want something, you've really got to work hard for it. And if you just stay honest and good and consistent, it'll be rewarded, was really their message. And life happens, right? My parents split up, and I was raised by a single mom, and she raised my sister and I. And that was rough for lots of reasons, because flash forward to me dealing with menstruating, right? And periods, sex, those are just not topics that you talk about in like a traditional Catholic Latino household. It's very taboo. So it's not that I didn't know that I wouldn't get my period, but you know, when I started talking about it and started talking about how painful it was, when I was around 14, 15, that was just kind of it. It was like, well, the sentiment when you talk to other Latinos is, well, this is the burden that women bear. It's pain, and that's what you're supposed to expect in life as a woman, is pain. And as the years went on and my symptoms would get worse, you know, when I was diagnosed at 21, that was terrifying for me. I had moved out of my house at 18, and I was actually afraid to go to a gynecologist. It's not a conversation I could have with my mother, because for her, asking to see a gynecologist, the thought of possibly getting on birth control for pain just meant that I was looking to be promiscuous and reckless. And even though I was bleeding so heavily, and it would disrupt my school day, right? Like I was going to high school, and you know, kids these days have it really good, the little thin pads that absorb so much. But when I was going to school, it was these big diaper pads, and I would put
Mhm.
like 4 of them in my jeans just to like make it through the day in high school. And a tampon was completely out of the question.
Mhm.
I couldn't even utter the word in the house. My mother didn't use them. And I remember one time I really wanted to get into the pool with my cousins, and I told my aunt, oh, I really want to swim. And she was like, oh, we have your period. You can't get in there. And I was like, well, what about a tampon? I saw tampons in the bathroom. And she was like, you use tampons? She was like, you're going to lose your virginity. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. Like, and then she told my mom and the aunts, and it was like a whole thing about like how Natalie wanted to deflower herself
Oh gosh.
to get into the pool, right? Which, and that's just, the,
Hmm.
the conservatism, the
Oh yeah, I grew up in the South. Um,
yeah.
so it's a whole different culture, but at the same time, your story resonates hardcore because you actually reminded me of a story that I experienced in high school where I've not even told anyone about this story. Like this is going to be a first time since it happened in high school where I had to stuff like an entire roll of toilet paper because I was wearing a dress and it went everywhere, all down your legs, the whole
Oh,
back of the dress. Thank God it was black and too big. But I had to like, I used everything in the bathroom to like, it looked like a murder,
oh my
scene. So
gosh.
when you said that, I
Yeah.
was like, I just like flashed back just like that to that memory of going, you know, wow. And so I'm really curious about how your diagnosis came because I went through that experience, but then I went on the rest of my life and didn't even get a diagnosis until last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I want that to change so
Yeah.
much.
It was over 30 years.
My
Yeah.
gosh. My gosh.
So how did your
I,
diagnosis come about?
I'm glad you got an answer though. So
Yeah.
I had to wait really to move out.
Mm,
I moved out of the house at like 18. Um, also grew up in a very strict household, and that was kind of just becoming a little bit much. I was like an adult, I was in college, I was
mm,
also
mm-hmm.
18 and thought I really had it all figured out. But I wish I could tell that Natalie, like,
Oh, I know. Oh,
get a hold of yourself.
I have the same. I have three teenagers right now.
Oh gosh, my sister and I are 7 years apart, so her teenage years were really hard for me.
Mm,
um but
yeah.
yeah, no, I was out of the house, and that's when I felt brave enough to go see a gynecologist. And this was really like, it was so traumatic of like my first experience. I did my research. Because I was having these horrible pains. I'm in college, I'm fainting all
Mm,
the time. Like I am just walking on my way to work, and I'm like fainting. Like there's been times where I fainted like in the front of a train station in New York City, just like flat on the floor and from the pain, and like woken up and just thankful that no one like took anything. And nobody
mm,
called the cops either because it's New York City, and just getting
mm,
on the subway and getting on with my day, right? Because like I have to work, I have to go to school.
yeah.
And so this is like the kind of stuff that was happening to me, and the bleeding was just so excessive, like you just described. Like I was finals week, and I made the mistake of wearing a dress, didn't realize my period was coming, and I had to like stop by a Target, buy pants, throw my dress in the garbage. I had maybe $20 to my name that week, and like spent
Mm.
it all on that clothes change to just barely pay the bus fare to get to school to take the test. And like this, I'm
Oh
sure
my
we all have
gosh.
stories like this.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and so I went to my first gynecologist, and I said, well, and it was two things, right? Like, because I was always like, and this is probably like, it's a lot of first gen can relate to this, oldest siblings. I was a very responsible kid, way beyond my years at 18. I was just worried about, I should have been making mistakes, and I should have been doing stupid things, but I wasn't. And I remember that, like, like I had read an encyclopedia when I was a kid because we were in El Salvador. There was nothing in English on TV, and we had an encyclopedia there that my aunt gave me, and I read the whole thing. And one of the ones that was there was like a parental guide. And I remember in that section about sex, it was like, if your daughter starts to have sex, you should take her to a gynecologist to start that relationship with the doctor. And so I was like, well, I am sexually active now. I'm going to get myself to a gynecologist.
Very good.
And
Well
and
done.
so I did that, and it was it's funny because I can remember to this day like what the room smelled like,
Mm.
what the temperature that it was. It was like winter, so it was like really warm in there. She immediately shamed me. She was like, I was 19.
Oh,
She was like,
no.
why are you having sex? She's like, you're gonna ruin your life. She was like, you know what's worse than an STD? A child. Literally, that's how it started. Because she asked
Wow.
me why I was there, and I was like, well, I've become sexually active, and I just want to make sure everything's okay. By the way, I have painful periods.
Yeah.
And she was just she was so judgmental. She chastised me the whole time. Didn't talk to me about I'm gonna look down there. I'm gonna put a speculum. Like she just shoved a speculum in.
Mm.
Um, excruciatingly painful. Um, and then she did a rectal exam without even
Oh, wow.
telling me that she was gonna do one. And like it was just so jarring. And then the last thing
Yeah.
she said to me was, she just completely ignored me complaining about pelvic pain or period pain. And she said, here's a birth control prescription before you ruin your life. And she was like, you should just move back in with your mom and finish school.
Wow. Wow.
Um, I'm getting emotional right now because
Yeah.
it was just, here I was like thinking I was doing a good thing.
And going to a place where you should have sanctuary, support, all of the things that if you don't provide that as a healthcare provider, you have no business being in healthcare, and it's you got the exact opposite of what it should be.
The opposite. And it was also validation of like my family's kind of conversations around women
Hmm.
and their bodies, right? That like I should be ashamed. I should,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have come here looking for a way to make sex a healthy experience. And it was hard. I really debated because I didn't want to go back to her ever again, right? She told me to come back for a pap smear. Um and I was just so ashamed. I literally thought she was gonna like call my mom.
Mm.
So that was the first experience I ever had with a gynecologist.
Yeah.
And
It's awful.
then I was experiencing again just another year of like worsening symptoms. Just the period week was terrible. I mean, it was just excruciatingly painful, excessive bleeding. I'm talking about almost 2 weeks of nonstop bleeding, and it wasn't just like it's just heavy. It's like gushing blood where like I'm constantly changing my pad throughout the day just to be able to make it through a day's work. And this was a time where like I'm living alone. I'm paying all everything by myself. I'm barely making enough money to afford anything. And I'm just trying to get through college. And so nutritional eating, that's I'm not thinking about that. I'm getting a
Hmm.
Subway $5 sandwich and I'm
Hmm.
splitting it for lunch and dinner just so that I can make sure that I have a meal twice a day. I'm trying to buy books, right? Nobody told me, and that's another thing, right? Nobody went to college in my family before me in the United
Yeah.
States. I was the first one, and so I'm the oldest of like no exaggeration, 27 cousins, two
Wow.
siblings. And so
Yeah.
I had no one to be like, what's college like? What should I
Hmm.
prepare for? I didn't
Yeah.
even apply until my band teacher is the reason I went to college because he was like, who filled out their applications? And it was like June, right? I didn't know
Oh,
kids went with their parents to go look at places.
yeah. Yeah.
And my mother didn't either, right? Like my mom was just trying to survive. And so it was that kind of, so here I am. Wondering what am I doing wrong and what is so broken about me that
Hmm.
I can't navigate college and work and I have this pain, right? It must be because I'm eating the Subway footlongs. It must be because I'm not able to exercise as much as everybody else. And there's something wrong inherently with me that I'm feeling this way. I'm a wuss. I can't take it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. What starts out as like what we think is healthy self-inquiry quickly turns into the dark side and becomes self-gaslighting.
exactly. And like we're talking about like my parents too, who like for at that point, 20 years of my life, all I see them is working 60, 70-hour shifts, um, and able to come home and cook and clean and take care of us and do our lawn, and do all these things. And here I'm expected to do. I'm so lucky that all I get to do is like go to college and work, but I can't even do that to the best of my ability because I'm in debilitating pain. So I finally am like, all right, I got to go see another gynecologist. Um, she's I wouldn't say it was a positive, safe experience either. Nothing like the first one, but she very much was like, okay, well, you're here. Yep, everything checks out. Here's a pap smear. Periods are painful. Don't know what to tell you. Okay, here's birth control, right? And that's the thing that always drove me crazy. Was why are you giving me this? Biologically, why do I need this? Can you please just explain it a little bit as to why I need this medication? Because that was another thing my parents were very much against. They were like, your nutrition is eaten, right? Like if you just eat well, you'll never have a disease in your life. So to have this thing that's supposed to prevent pregnancy, you're not explaining to me why I need this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm telling you that I'm practicing family planning in my own way, but why are you giving me this? And so another prescription that just went in the garbage. I think I found somebody else like 3 months later, similar situation, pain is normal, nothing, everything is fine. Your sonograms are clear. I don't see anything. You may be experiencing pain because you're fat and you got to lose weight. And looking back now, I mean, I was like 100 pounds lighter then. And what I was is curvy. I've always had a really big butt and big thighs, no matter what weight I've been. And I was very active because I was running around all over New York
Yeah.
City trying to make it to work and college, and trying to exercise, and find time for it. Not at a gym because I couldn't afford it, but just trying to stay active. And this time I started Googling stuff, and again, kids have it great nowadays. You have ChatGPT. Like Google searches back then sucked. I mean, you put something in and you wouldn't really get much. And WebMD had started to like pop up. And I distinctly remember putting in all my symptoms and the word popped up, endometriosis. And I remember that like it said that, like the causes of it was like having a career. Um it was an STD, right? And and that explanation that it's, which we know is not correct, the uterine lining somehow getting out in the body and growing,
Yeah,
right?
retrograde
Retrograde,
menstruation,
yeah.
fallacy.
Yes, Samson's theory, which we know is widely debunked now. We need more research there, but so I was like, interesting. I was like, so my uterine lining is growing. All right, so I'm trying to. I was always a biology nerd. I don't know why that's not what I went into, like some sort of STEM field, but I guess psychology sort of counts. But I was like, okay, this is what it might be. It sounds like what I have, but I don't have an STD. That's so weird, right? And I was like, and I don't have a career, but I guess I want to go to college. I'm in college. I'm trying to
Oh, the
finish.
medical misogyny there is just massive. It's
Right.
massive. So you're listing things like you have these cultural stigmas, misconceptions about menstruation, what it should be, that it shouldn't be painful, family dynamics, um, medical gaslighting. You have all of these things that, and your story about being first gen college student, I have the same thing too, so that you're navigating this very low health literacy because where you grew up, how you grew up, that no one went to college, and here you are. you know
Exactly.
that's an enormous amount to overcome. That would be an enormous amount to overcome without endo.
Oh gosh, yes.
right?
And that's like a huge thing, right? And again, this isn't a conversation I'm going back to having with my mom or anybody in my family because one, I'm
Mm-hmm.
ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mortified that I'm having this experience. There's like this thing culturally, like in my family too, where like if you have an illness, God's punishing you for
Mm.
something,
Like
right?
a
So
yeah, prosperity kind of gospel, you know, which a lot of people in the deep south have the same thing, where if you're wealthy you must be a great person, or if you're blessed with something material like good health, therefore you must be a good person, or the opposite. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so and nobody in my family talked about having painful period. I didn't find out until after my grandmother passed away that she had intense, horrific period pain in
And she
her
suffered
life,
with it her whole life.
and that she had a hysterectomy
Oh
when she was
goodness.
done having her kids, right? And then thing is too, my mother, was hard for her to empathize because like she's one of these women that's like, my periods never hurt. They were always wonderful. My pregnancies were great. I didn't feel anything. and, and so for her to see her kid like come and make a boiling tub of water so that I could go in and burn myself, right? She was
Mm,
just at a loss. So I'm not talking to anybody about this. And also, I didn't even know that the way the doctors were treating me wasn't okay. I
right.
had nobody
Yeah.
to share that with either,
Yeah.
or an adult to come and advocate for me, right? Like I have
Mm-hmm.
patients reach out to me and they tell me how they're taking their parents, and I'm like, yeah, take your parents, take anybody that can come and kind of like validate what you're saying.
Yeah.
But like, it's not like I could have my mom come into the room. Shame aside, she spoke English, right? But not healthcare English, not
Mm-hmm.
English to navigate a situation like this. For her, you just have painful periods. All the doctors are saying this is normal. So I remember if this must have been like maybe the fourth doctor at this point, the fourth gynecologist, and I kept choosing women also because I didn't want a man to touch me there. Like that,
Right.
I might as well just throw myself, you know what I mean? Just throw the family honor out the window. So, it makes me think of Downton Abbey when they talk about House of Ill Repute, right? Like that's not what I
Mm.
was trying to bring down on my family. And so I remember I said to her, I was like, listen, I've been to all these gynecologists. This is what they've said. But please, I was like, here's some sonograms that I've taken. But please, like I am in just so much pain. I'm fainting, I'm bleeding excessively. I just need somebody to let me know what it could it be this thing that I found. It's called endometriosis. And she gave me a look of such disdain. And
Wow.
she literally looks at me and goes, "Where did you find that?" And I said,
Mm.
I searched online." And she said, "Don't Dr. Google me."
Ugh.
And she was like, "You don't have that. You're too young to have that. Women your age don't have that." And she's like, "What you have is just normal periods." And she's like, I see here that you're refusing to take birth control." She's like, "If you take birth control, you're going to feel better."
So what happened?
And so that was the end of it. And so I was just like, all right, like it's me. Like I'm a wuss. I can't handle it. I can't handle being a woman. This is my fault. Like, and then also I'm fat. Am I
Mm.
eating nutritiously? Latino food is so unhealthy. Rice is terrible for you. Beans are terrible for you. All your food is fried. I think what she was thinking of is a particular type of cuisine, but Central American food is actually on its basis vegan because meats and stuff were introduced later by the Spaniards. So anyway, for her to make that assumption was bizarre to me because I was like, there's not a lot of fried food that my parents made growing up, but whatever. Um, to like it was just a lot. So I think a year passed by of worsening symptoms. I
Yeah.
mean, I could barely focus on school. I was barely able to make it to class, which just created a whole other, because the only thing that anybody ever cared about in my family it wasn't how are you doing, how are things going, blah blah blah. It was how's school going. Like I was like I was going to be the first kid, the first grandchild to go to college, right? And so that's all anybody ever asked me about, and that's all anybody ever cared about, and it was my entire identity, was that I was this college student with aspirations and goals, and who knows, the sky's the limit, right? And so I think a year passed by before I even tried again to talk to somebody. And then I had my friend telling me about how she had started seeing a gynecologist, my best friend. And she said, maybe you should go talk to him. And I said, a man? And she was like, yeah, she's like, he's really nice. And my mom, he delivered me. He delivered all these babies in my family. Maybe he can help you. And I was desperate at that point. I mean, desperate. Um, and I think and I also had even seen a gastroenterologist. They told me to go see one because they said this must be stomach issues that you're having. That's not period stuff. Because I was suffering from a lot of constipation, which I would learn later has a lot to do with the pelvic floor. And so I went to him, and I literally I was so defensive, so on guard, and I was just ready to, I was like, I'm gonna walk out if he talks to me a certain way, and I was terrified. But I went in his office. He was so incredibly kind. Literally just he did a quick examination, and he walked me through every single thing he was going to do and touch and see. Didn't even look, right? He was kind of doing this thing when he was like doing internal checking, whatever, and had me dress. I go into his office, and he tells me, explain to me what's going on. And I tell him the whole thing, and I'm gonna cry. And he looked at me, and there's like a big I grew up in Brooklyn, so like you grow up with like people from like all different cultures, so you speak little words from all these languages. And so he looked at me and he said, Habibi, which is Arabic for my love, right? It's a term of endearment, like you would say to a young girl, a kid. And he says, Habibi, I think you have endometriosis. And I didn't say the word endometriosis to him. I didn't even say it because I didn't want him to have the reaction that other woman did. And he said, I'm really sorry. This is a painful disease. And he said, the only way that I can even tell is if we do a surgery, which looking back now was huge that he even had the insight to do that.
Yeah.
And he said, it's the only way. I'm so sorry that we have to do a surgery, but it's the only way. And then your best bet is to go on birth control because it helps control the endometriosis growth. And, you got to decide to have kids soon because you're going to be infertile by the time you're 30. And we got to do a hysterectomy as soon as I can. And I was 21, and I left, called my friend immediately, and I was just hysterical. I was like, I'm infertile. I have this disease. I have to have surgery, right? Just like gobsmacked with all of this. And I think that like maybe a year ago I wouldn't have even done what he suggested, but I wanted them to just go inside. And if there was nothing, then there was nothing, but at least I would know that I wasn't crazy. And so we did that, and we scheduled the surgery. I failed out that semester because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But we did the surgery. He did ablation, burning the top off of the endometriosis, which is not the appropriate treatment for endo. Right. And he closed me up, and what he sent to the pathology lab concluded that it was endometriosis. And I mean, when I woke up and he's explaining this to me, I was just so happy because I wasn't crazy. I was like, look, there was something inside of me. And I think it made it really real for my mother too. Yeah. Right? Because it's not that she didn't believe me, but I think she was just like, what is she complaining? Like, nobody in the family deals with this, right? As far as we know. And that was it. I had a name for my pain, but that was it. I would then have to endure 8 years horrific worsening symptoms before I even discovered this whole other world that I'm now involved in.
Yeah, yeah. So when did you, because gosh, you've touched on so much about, access to healthcare, about multiple experiences being medically traumatized due to gaslighting, about not having an advocate, um, and to get to the point where then at some point, I assume that in that 8-year evolution, you learned about excision and the gold standard, and what happened from there. Was it 8 more years then?
So no, it was so from 21 to 29. I mean, so now 21-year-old Natalie gets the name. 29-year-old Natalie found endometriosis groups, right? Because now the internet's starting to fill up with endometriosis, right? I have this word to search now over the years. And, it kept being a lot of nothing online until finally you find like Facebook groups and all this other stuff. And I found like a support group that was, in my opinion, awful. A lot of these women, I just couldn't relate to their experiences. I was childless by choice at that time because I still am because I couldn't see myself. I didn't feel ready to have a kid. I was really focused. I finished school. Thank God. Like it took a lot longer than it should have, but I finished my college degree, which taught me research. Right. It's like,
Yeah.
I think it's like people think, oh, you understand people, and I'm like, no, I know how to read or research people pretty well. Is what I know how to do. And navigating a relationship and starting my career in finance, right? Like I ended up in hedge funds, and because I needed health insurance. I needed to pay off my student loans,
Yeah.
and I needed health insurance. This wasn't my career wasn't born out of passion. It was born out of pain. And being able to just afford all these doctors that I have to see all the time just to make sure that I wasn't dying, because I was in the ER every year, right? There was always one episode that I was like, this is it. This is the one where I'm going to die. I don't know what's exploding in me, but something is. It went from feeling bad one week a month, 2 weeks a month, the entire month. The entire month I feel terrible. The week of my period is the worst, and having a lot of jobs where like I just didn't even have benefits. I couldn't take off.
Yeah.
Right. Thank God for New York passing the law where they were forced to give sick time, because I worked at places where I didn't have sick time. I worked holidays for years, just to be able to get by, and pay off the things that I needed to. And so like this whole life of like, what is Natalie going to do? Right. Because I was like the honors kid and the smart kid and the science fair kid. And I felt like a loser. I was just like, what am I haven't been able to do anything, because like I've had to just take jobs to be able to pay stuff off and have health insurance, because I couldn't even afford my birth control. It was like $50 a month. And my parents weren't in a position to help me, right? They just couldn't. And so I'm trying to always find new stuff. And so I found like one group that was just like a lot of what felt like Midwestern women who were very religious that were just trying to have kids. And that's what the groups were about. It was
Fertility
like,
driven. Yeah.
yeah, can't get pregnant, can't get pregnant, can't get pregnant.
Yeah.
Wasn't my focus. My doctor kept telling me, when are you going to get pregnant? When are you going to get pregnant? Not only is it going to help your endometriosis, but then we could finally do the hysterectomy,
Makes my
right?
head roll.
And I had done a lot of work to just kind of be like, I'm never having kids, right? It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to set myself up for that disappointment. And then I remember there was one post that somebody made, and somebody said, I hate Nancy's Nook. They're so mean there. I hate that group. And I was like, what is this group?
And that's how you found out? Oh my gosh.
And so I joined Nancy's Nook,
Oh my
and
gosh.
the overflow of information,
Your head just exploded.
to a different stratosphere.
Yeah.
Learning about Dr. Redwine, learning about Nancy's story, learning about excision, reading all these stories of people that just had so much success with this surgery which was like so punk rock too. I was like, look at these doctors, just like, I don't care what your status quo is. Like, this isn't helping people. We're going to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sat on that for 2 years because I kept reading that the surgery was expensive.
Yeah.
I never inquired. But I was like, well, I know for sure I can't afford it. I could barely pay my bus fare right now. I'm just, my student loans weren't obscene at the time. I don't even know how I had money for food. And, I sat on it for 2 years because and then sometimes your pain gets better. So you gaslight yourself and,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and then also like I would go through bursts of being able to like over exercise, over restrict my eating, and just like I'm gonna fix this holistically, and I'm gonna and I'm doing everything holistic I can find, and paying for programs on Instagram, and paying for nutrition plans from people that shouldn't be giving me nutrition advice, and also still not talking to my family about it. Like my family just had no clue what I was going through.
Yeah.
And everything that I learned in those 8 years about healthcare, I took a job at a health insurance company just to learn about healthcare. Like I was one of those people that when you called, I was the one that picked up and helped you navigate care. And then I realized like how complicated it is, and how much my mom couldn't help me if she wanted to, because this is something that like, even if you are multi-generational in this country, you probably don't really know how to navigate. And then you have to understand the nuance of like, I mean, this is a huge conversation right now in the media, but it's like everything's going to get denied, and it's the first barrier to you not even asking for it again, right? They don't want you to come back and ask for it, in the interest of money, right? And so that's how I then learned how to understand what a schedule of benefits is. What does this mean? What is my copay? What's an out-of-network provider? Can I get reimbursement for an out-of-network provider?
Yeah.
So that's why I like learned all that stuff. Hated that job. It was 6 months. And then that's when I took the job at the hedge fund. So then 29, my whole life fell apart. My pain was the worst it ever was. What made it better was getting rid of my ex. and
Stress and that role in pain is it's a real deal.
Absolutely. I had started therapy, right? So I was really starting to just like, because I didn't even understand it at the time. All this trauma I'd been through, right? Medical trauma, family trauma, everything trauma. And so here I am like processing all this stuff, and I meet who is now my husband. And he was the first partner who I had who was like very interested in, he's like, what's endometriosis? What's going on? Like, what does it do to you? Very supportive, very kind. And then he said, this excision surgery, can we work something out where like you start to save for it, and and I had already started to save for it, but he was like, what can we do to speed this up? So, that was another huge hurdle that I didn't even realize that I had, was financial literacy.
Yeah.
Understanding what a loan is, understanding that I was paying the minimum on the loan, and that's why the needle wasn't moving. Understanding how to save money, right? Like again, just more financial literacy and how things work that like I would have never learned from anywhere else. So that was like a huge change in my life. And literally it's like it was meant to happen. We went on a date. I felt this horrific electrical pain in my pelvic area. And at this point, my legs are throbbing 24/7. Every step is horrifically painful. My pelvic area feels like somebody scratched it with razor blades and is just shoving lemon and salt all over the entire cavity. Everything hurts. Everything. It's just pain 24/7. I can work out for periods of time and then I can't. It was just awful. And I felt like something fell out of my vagina. So I run to go see my doctor, the same one who diagnosed me. And he does an exam, and he's like, you have pelvic prolapse. And I was like, what? And he was like, I've never seen this in a patient who hasn't given birth. And he was like, you have prolapse. And he was like, and then again, just it turned into like this chastisement of like, what are you waiting for? You got to get pregnant. We have to do a hysterectomy, and now I'm going to have to stitch your uterus to your abdominal wall because it's falling out. And I was just like, what do you mean? And so I was like, is this related to my endometriosis? And he was like, no, it has nothing to do with it. Again, other devastating news. Go in Nancy's Nook. I type in pelvic prolapse. Don't really find much. I Google who treats pelvic prolapse, pelvic floor therapist. And I'm like, what the heck is a pelvic floor therapist? I go back in Nancy's Nook and I'm like, pelvic floor therapist. And all these posts from Dr. Sally Sorrell pop up. And I'm reading all these posts, and then I see that she does this thing called the Endometriosis Summit, and she just had a bunch of videos where she's talking to endometriosis experts, and I'm like, so there was a whole episode on poop, and I was like, this is me. I was
Yeah.
like, I have that pain. My butthole
Yeah.
hurts. I have
Yeah.
constipation, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just, and so I'm watching all of these videos, and I'm like, that's me, that's me, that's me. And so I was like, okay, maybe she's the person that can help me with this and let me know if it's also endo. I go see her. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, goes with me, and she just gets right to business. And I wrote her like a desperate email too, and she was just so kind in the response to it. She probably gets so many of these, and I go in there. She just gets to business, and she's like, prolapse. She was like, you have pelvic floor tension. She's like, has anybody told you have a hypertonic pelvic floor? And I was like, how has my gynecologist been in there since I was 21? And he didn't tell me I had a
First of all, yeah, how?
pelvic floor tension. And she's like, well, that's one. You have hypertonic pelvic floor. And it's funny, I actually printed this out. So this is what I took to go see her.
Oh
I
gosh.
had a little
Yeah.
body chart,
Yeah. Yep.
and I had put an X, like tracing where like I had pain, and she was like, you just mapped out your inguinal nerves, your
Mm-hmm.
genitofemoral nerves. She's like,
Mm-hmm.
you mapped, it's all mapped out.
Like
And
you
I
looked
said,
in an anatomy book and mapped it out. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, what's that? And she,
Mm-hmm.
she's like doing her thing, and she's like, I think you might have hernias. She was like, I can't tell, I can't diagnose that for you, but we can send you somewhere. And then she was like, and you have the endometriosis, so, this might be what's going on. And I was like, and I have ovary pain all the time. And she was like, your ovaries are here. That's your bladder. So I got like an anatomy lesson,
Yeah.
validation, and, confirmation that I wasn't insane, that I didn't have prolapse, and that endo absolutely can cause all of these horrific things that I'm experiencing
Mm-hmm.
all in one shot.
Yeah. Yep.
And another tearful night. And so I was very privileged at the time that I could afford to see her. Dr. Sally had very reasonable rates at the time, but it was still out of network.
Yep.
I had an insurance plan that was able to pay me back for them.
That's good.
Um and within a few months, like I saw her, I think like in June maybe. I was having excision surgery by December with Dr. Vidali, here in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
who also just huge validation, somebody who was able to speak my language, somebody who understood, like just complete like 180 to what I was experiencing before.
Yeah.
And so we also spoke to Dr. Zoland, who's an occult hernia specialist, and he was like, yeah, again, all my scans all my life were perfect, normal, nothing. He looked at an old CAT scan and he was like, you have hernias, maybe 2 or 3. And so we did the excision first to see what would happen. The world shut down in 2020, 2 months after the surgery. And that year was hard because I couldn't go see anybody in person for pelvic floor therapy, which I desperately needed,
Yeah.
because
It's so important post-op.
all the symptoms got horrific afterwards.
Yeah.
Post-op, I mean, my nerves were angry, my pelvic floor was angry, my
Mm-hmm.
bladder was angry. And so I was doing like virtual stuff. Once the vaccine came out, I felt brave enough to go in person. But the nerve pain was really bothering me. So I went for the hernia surgery because I was like, it either will fix something or it won't. At surgery time, turns out I had 7 hernias.
Oh my goodness.
So it had 2 femoral, 2 obturator, 2 inguinal, belly button. When I woke up from that surgery, which made me appreciate how difficult an excision surgery can be, You know, and the excision surgery, like it was all my peritoneal area. None on my organs really, a little bit on an ovary, but basically like my entire, like where your pelvic floor is, like that's where I had like these nasty clumps of endo that Dr. Vidali cleaned out. Got diagnosed with adenomyosis. And he was the first person to ever run some hormone testing. And because of him, I found out that I had Hashimoto's and PCOS, which was adding
Yeah. Yep.
to the pain and discomfort. So just so many answers in such a short period of time. And it's actually December 19th is going to be 5 years post excision surgery. I'm 4 years post hernia repair. My life is so different. It's so different. My pain levels are usually a 0 to a 2.
Awesome.
Periods are non-events. You know, they last 4 days now as opposed to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I did pelvic floor therapy is really what like just saved my life. I did it twice a week for almost a year after. I started working with a personal trainer. I started powerlifting. I did my first competition this year.
Yeah.
Like it just and I've had ups and downs, right? Because it wasn't just the pelvic floor, it was the nerves had to calm down and the bladder had to calm down. And and it took time for those things to kind of quiet down. And I'm in a fantastic place. Like I didn't realize how much I had gotten used to and accepted as okay.
Yeah.
How much doctors told me that it was normal, that I was in that much pain and discomfort.
No, you weren't believed, right? They didn't believe you that you were actually in that much pain.
No, not at all. And also like I know all of us with endo probably have a high pain tolerance, but like I also just wasn't expressing it probably the way they would have wanted me to, and so I just have such a different life now. I was able to keep my career, which I know is hard for a lot of people, and I like talking about that because the number one question I have is is like, you know, do I have to give up on my dreams? And I'm like, I don't know, but let's talk about your symptoms and figure out if you can keep all your dreams, because it would be really cool if we could keep some of them. Maybe some have to be let go, but some we can keep. That's my like diagnosis excision story. I'll stop there.
It's like you face so much more discrimination. You may face so many more barriers. And, you know, as a first generation college student, that and from the South, where some of those cultural, super conservative, very limiting beliefs that are going to limit women specifically, right? We'll be very specific about that. They're only self-limiting for women, or imposing those limits on women. So when you add all those up, I just want to applaud you in so many different facets for everything that you've overcome, because you just didn't overcome endo. If you were just the Midwesterner that you're talking about, right? And you had to overcome endo, that's a lot, you know, to overcome endo. But then you add all these other variables that probably at one point, probably at 15 points along the way, felt like they were too much to overcome, that you wouldn't be able to overcome them because there was too many things stacked against you. Just being a woman means your pain is not going to be believed and you're not going to be taken seriously. And then you
100%.
then you add all of the other variables in that we have talked about, the of identity, of the intersectionality, of being both a Latina and a woman, navigating a healthcare system that doesn't even know how to properly screen for endometriosis,
No.
right? And that the burden, and this is where we can say real clearly, we're not trying to blame a system. However, if you look at what OBGYNs are faced with, it's like, okay, we should think about there being OBs and GYNs, not OBGYNs. We should also think about there being non-surgical gynecologists and surgical gynecologists. There are cardiologists and cardiothoracic surgeons, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
why don't we have that for every single specialty in the body, except for women's health? There is the non-surgical provider and the surgical provider. And then yet in OBGYN, the whole laundry list of everything that could go wrong or right with a woman's body is laid down on one person
Yeah.
to do everything. It's really so unfair, so unbelievably unfair. And then, we talk about navigating endometriosis across the spectrum, of your life too.
Yeah.
So there's just the need for specialized care in endo, and to be able to properly support, Latino women with similar experiences to yours the importance of that can't be overstated. So, okay. So based on that, I have a few questions. Um, One, I know that you didn't have that support of community. That deeply resonates with me because growing up where I did, there was a similar lack of support.
Hmm.
Um, had your community known and been empowered with that information, it would have been different, but it wasn't. It was what it was. You didn't have that support. So how have you, finding Nancy's Nook, finding Dr. Sally Sorrell, finding a community of women who've also gone through this, how does community play a role in managing your condition, like right now and moving forward? And what other resources have you found to be helpful?
Yeah, no, that's why I'm even here talking to you. So, um, as usual, I always overthink things and do like a risk analysis. And it took me 2 years before I was like, am I going to talk about my story publicly? And does it matter, right? Does my story matter? And more importantly, I don't even care so much about my story. It's more that I just want to help people navigate
Mm-hmm.
this in the way that like I wish somebody could have supported me, just to tell me that like my life wasn't going to be over, or that and that I wasn't gonna have to give up on everything because I have endometriosis.
Yeah.
And so at the Endometriosis Summit in March 2020, I was there. I was fresh out of surgery.
Oh my
I had signed up
gosh.
to volunteer. Right, we had heard of this pandemic thing, but it
Wow.
wasn't the world wasn't shut down yet. And I got I got there and I was sat next to this other person who was volunteering. Her name is Sarah Ramos, and she was a gorgeous Mexican woman from California, and she was probably one of the only other Latinas in this space that I had seen. And to meet another Latino with endometriosis was like, again, not that I couldn't empathize or talk to other people, but I was like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
we just clicked immediately. And we were just like, oh my God, you had to deal with that. Me too. Like, how do you explain it to your parents? How do you explain it to your cousins? When you're trying to eat differently, do you get judgment for it? What does it feel like to talk about fertility or lack of fertility in a culture that values family and building a family so much? It's almost like our sole purpose as women.
Right.
And like it was just a venting session, a connecting session, and I mean we built a sisterhood there that I didn't know I was missing and I needed. And because of the Endo Summit, I did meet other patients there, and there was 4 of us who then were in a group chat during the pandemic, which was so needed because a few of us had just had surgery. Somebody had had a surgery a year out. Somebody was going to have surgery. So we were able to all support each other and be like, I'm having this weird pain. Is this, we were all able to share information, talk to each other, and just be able to talk about our symptoms and not have somebody be like, oh my God, do you want to go to the ER? And it's like, no, the ER makes it worse. Or, or, oh my God, like, are you okay? And it's like, no, I'm not okay. and, and just have like a group where I could just talk about endo and not be the person with endo because everybody has endo.
Has it. Yeah.
And so as and then Sarah and I talked about like, should we share our stories? Should we talk about endo? We don't there, and there was a lot of like accounts that had started popping up on Instagram, and You have like some of my favorite people and friends, Endo right? Shannon's a PhD in counseling, and her perspective on endometriosis and how she navigated the disease, and she would write about it, was just so like it was like this dry wit humor, and you either got it or you didn't, and that was so helpful while I was navigating. Endo Girls blog, Katie, she's a chemist, so she was giving her perspective on the disease and her assessment on stuff through the lens of a chemist. And she was just facts based, and that really resonated with me because that's how kind of like my brain is wired. And there were women talking about their experiences and processing the disease and all those things. And so her and I were just like, this is wonderful that we have this and we can talk to some of these people and be seen, but I don't see anybody that's Latina talking about it. I don't see emphasis on Latina. We don't see them on panels. We don't see them being invited to speak. And so we were very cautious about it, and it took a while. So I was like, let me just do it. So I created the account Endo Cipota. Endo is short for endometriosis. Cipota is a colloquialism used in Central America. Salvadorans use it a lot, and it just means like girl, like kid, but a woman. And I was like, people will then know I have endometriosis and I'm Central American at the very least.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to just talk about everything we've talked about, like the first gen struggles. A lot of the Central Americans in the United States are first generation. We're the diaspora of El Salvador's civil war. And now a lot of us came over in our parents came over in the 80s, had us in the 80s, and so I'm 35, and we're not kids anymore. We're educated, right? We're the ones that a lot of us went to college. A lot of us are educated. A lot of us are navigating the corporate world, the education world, the healthcare world for the first time. And so I was like, I can speak to those people, right? Like I can tell them, like, you want better insurance? Like, I've navigated the corporate ladder. Like, let's talk about what kind of insurance plans you should pick and that stuff. And I was like, I can share those experiences. Or just like, the jokes that, Latinos are kind of known for, like, picking on each other as a love language. I don't really participate in that as much because I'm a little sensitive, but I was like, sometimes you'll get those questions from aunts like, oh, you look fat. Ugh. And it's like, do you really want to be like, I have endo bloating? Like, I have this disease called endometriosis, which is endometrial, like, an issue that grows outside the uterus. Like, it's like, how much is an explanation? Do people even get it?
You don't want to have to be a public health siren wherever you go.
Exactly. And so those conversations are on the holidays, or why haven't you settled down? Why don't you have kids yet? Right? Maybe infertility is something super difficult to talk about right now.
The level of boundary setting that you have to have in that cultural situation is like, it just got turned way up.
Yeah. And so then, like, so something like Below the Belt, which is a fantastic film. Like, we've all been so excited about it because it's a real film that we can show with doctors and patients and legislators talking about this in a way that our families can be like, wow, like, this is a serious thing. But even that film, right? Like, one woman, her relative is a representative, right? And in our government. One woman is like mortgaging her house to be able to afford excision surgery. Nobody in our families own homes. Some do. Not in my family. That like, my parents can't mortgage any. Like, some of the advice to have excision surgery just doesn't apply to people that don't even know what a 401k is, right? Like, or understand that you can advocate for certain benefits or advocate for certain things at a doctor's office, who maybe don't even have the language to do so. That intergenerational wealth isn't just things. It isn't just money, it's knowledge. So when I did the screening of Below the Belt here in Brooklyn with another amazing advocate, her name is Alicia DeGrossa, and she does a lot of advocacy in St. Kitts, which is where her mother's from. And she also has that first gen multicultural experience. We made it on purpose. Everybody could have come. Everybody was welcome, but we were like, we want BIPOC people to know that you're at the forefront of our minds. If you're LGBTQ, you're at the forefront of our minds. There's a space for you here. You don't have to identify as a woman and have endometriosis and come to our event. And there'll be a Latina and a Black woman here to talk to you about this disease, right? Like, you can come and chat with us. And we wanted to make sure it was free because even though I like this quote about Latinos in general, right? Like, we're minorities, but we're the new majority, right? We're becoming a group that's really powerful. We're like the third most powerful voting group. There, I wanted to speak to them. I wanted them to know they were prioritized to come, but anybody could come, and it was free, and anybody who signed up to get a seat got a seat. And after the film, people were like blown away. We're so glad that like there was a word for this thing that they were also navigating. They weren't sure if they had endo. Maybe now after watching the film they do, but they're like, I don't have money to see an excision surgeon. Like, my family can't help me pay for one. Like, those doctors, can I even go see them? And conversations of like, how does somebody like me navigate this? Like, I don't have a college degree. Like, I work this type of job, and like I don't know what my insurance is like. So that's when I was like, all right, that's okay. We're going to have conversations around this. And I'm like, Dr. Sonorvo is an incredible doctor, and if you are dealing with thoracic lung issues, like, we probably want to go talk to him and just reach out to the Center for Endocare, right? Heather Guerdon leads the charge there. She's an incredible advocate that has done so much for us, and I was like, just talk to them. Who knows? Let's find out if there's payment plans, right? And that's kind of like the conversations that we've had, because then it's also like, well, why aren't these doctors in network? And that's like whole other podcast.
Oh yes, definitely.
But for a lot, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to point listeners to Heather's podcast, because she will be speaking with us as well.
Yay!
Yeah.
Heather is fantastic. And so just these conversations of like, family, these other first-gen Latinos who are like, well, doesn't health insurance pay for everything? Shouldn't they cover everything?
Right.
So is this surgery safe because it's not covered by my insurance? And so they're like, some of this advice just kind of doesn't make sense for me. And then like pelvic floor therapy, when I tell some first-gen women and people with endometriosis about pelvic floor therapy, they're like, the doctor puts their hand inside, and I'm like, well, not always. Like, if you're not ready for that, you can talk to a pelvic floor therapist about other ways to mitigate those things. And it's just like, there's just so much taboo around things that have to do with the culture, have to do with the religion. And so I think that really opened up my eyes to, okay, there needs to be more conversations happening towards Latinos and more representation towards Latinos. And so when I started the Instagram page, which is like my only platform, I was like, I'm going to have people talk that don't typically get to talk, don't typically get asked about their experience or how they navigated it. And so through a lot of like this digging, I've been able to meet pelvic floor therapists who are Latino and can maybe really directly understand so many of the things that we're talking about, that can understand that like sometimes like Latino families do everything united, right? Like, if somebody has an illness, we're all getting in there, and it's our business, and we're getting in it. And sometimes, and having the support of your family is so important when you're making a decision. Everybody gets a voice and an input and a judgment. And sometimes a doctor just being willing to talk to like a parent or an aunt or uncle or a sibling to explain it is so profound. And because we make decisions as a community, that's our mindset. It's always very community based. There's a lot of individualism in the United States, which is a great thing. And also, but it also can create isolation and it create a whole different type of spiral of shame, right? That like you could create for yourself. And so
Yeah.
and so when I talk about this, like this constant, like, and a lot of people are like, oh my God, my whole life I've been trying to measure up to this work ethic that I haven't been able to be a part of because I have a chronic illness. And then I like it when people come to me because I could say, but you are so strong. Like your body survived like chronic, excruciating pain for years, and you still had a family. You still got married. You still went to school. You were still able to have this job. You were still able to do all these things, and I just have to reframe strength a little bit sometimes with other first gen kids. So it's those kind of conversations, or conversations around being told that our food is unhealthy, right? Being told that our food is what's making us sick, and doctors really not taking a moment to look into what we're actually
What you
eating,
actually
right?
eat. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was like, really, the avocado and the sofrito, which is all the vegetables, and the steamed chicken, like really, that's unhealthy, you know? And so having those conversations and reframing a lot of those things and putting it into a perspective of like, let me connect you with a Latino nutritionist that can maybe help you navigate this stuff if this is something you want to tackle.
Right.
Or let me explain to you how you can explain to your parents in Spanish what endometriosis is, and maybe they can understand it that way. Or do you want me to talk to your parents? I can talk to them and explain to them what it's like. And a lot of times, like the first gen kids, all we care about is making it, whatever that looks like, whether it's a career, whether it's college, and being able to tell them, well, this is what you could do at work. You can ask for accommodations. Like you have the right for this. This is how you can navigate your healthcare. This is what you could do at school to make things easier for yourself that I wish I had done. And so, or maybe you can't have surgery right now. Maybe you can't afford it, but maybe you could see a physical therapist that's covered by your insurance. Because pelvic floor therapy isn't accessible to you right now. Because I know that that's one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people is accessing pelvic floor care. And so just finding other ways to get to this, because I think there could be a narrative like you have to have excision. That's the only way you're ever going to survive this. And some people just can't do that. They can't afford it. Or they don't want to have the surgery. And I think it's okay to have the conversation where it's like, as long as it's an informed decision, and you understand what you're signing up for, that's okay. And not making people feel guilty or ashamed for their choices, because we have so much of that already.
Right. Right. Well, and that kind of shored up my second question too, which was, moving from the community and support into empowerment and advocacy, really. And so, I was going to ask a question which you already answered, so you don't have to, about advice you would give to other Latina women who are struggling but hesitant to seek care, and how healthcare providers can better support Latina women in navigating endo. So if you guys didn't hear this brilliant answer, just press rewind and listen, because I got to ask the question last, but you answered it first. So thank you very much. I think that the importance of the experience of women who aren't what we think of and what we see a lot of, which is the waspy, type of, whether it's the Midwesterner that you mentioned, or whomever it is, to be able to have that representation, to be able to see that there's an entire spectrum of women that we're probably likely, the more we talk about it, the more that we research it, realize that it's at least 1 in 10. And if you look
Yeah.
around, how many dozens of women do you see in a day? Okay, there's a lot of them that you just passed by, from all different backgrounds, races, locations, gendered identity, etc., that have endo and that we need to reach. And so I really appreciate your time in, taking the opportunity to say, okay, for all Latino women, here are the resources. Here is how it can look better for you. Here is, your story, which is an incredibly incredibly powerful story of a lot of suffering that I wish that you didn't have to go through, and that I know you and I both hope no one has to go through after this. And to mention too, I think one more point I want to draw out about talking about excision surgery being a part of it, and it is our gold standard, but it isn't the only thing that you have to do, and is not the only thing to do. And if I draw in like a personal piece of that puzzle, it's why I think that I was able to delay diagnosis as long as I did, because that's what I do for a living. And so integrative medicine, lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, managing inflammation, managing the nutritional triggers that can create systemic inflammation, making sure that estrogen metabolism is great and that we're not introducing a bunch of xenoestrogens and fake estrogens into the diet that can really fuel it. If someone is carefully monitoring those things, then you can mitigate and minimize the impacts of it. You can decrease pain if you're going to pelvic floor PT as well, because that's yet another way to be able to manage and mitigate. And, I see a lot of patients with endometriosis, and having endometriosis provides a unique perspective on that. But there are at least a half a dozen solid variables that are important even after someone has excision surgery that you well know has to be addressed, from the pelvic side of things. And so I just can't like celebrate, you and your journey and your story enough. It's everybody needs to hear it. So thank you,
I
Nathali.
appreciate that. And I think and I'm not trying to be like practice humility, but it's like so many of us have this story, and some of us have been through such harrowing things, and Latinas Con Endo, the point of Latinas Con Endo, which Sarah and I co-founded together, is going to be that this disease can be so awful and dark, and it can really put you in a mindset where it can be very difficult to feel hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
But you can live your life, you can enjoy your life. You can have fun, right? Like one of the most depressing things for me, and this is gonna maybe sound a little stereotypical, was like not being able to dance or wear high heels as a Latina. Like it's part of my cultural identity to do those things. And I was able to get back to it,
Yeah.
thanks to pelvic floor therapists and excision surgeons, and
Yeah.
Sarah surfs. She has thoracic endo, and she's out there surfing, teaching salsa lessons, and
Mm.
that's what we want, is that you can still live an actualized life, and you don't have to give up everything. And we're not medical professionals. We can't tell you how to navigate the disease exactly, but if you're missing that, the like, how can I get back to being in touch with my culture, because a lot of it is so much dependent on my body, like come talk to us. We're happy. We have virtual group chats. We have
Awesome.
events where we have doctors talk to patients in Spanish and English. So
Fantastic.
that's the point of it. That's
Yeah.
all of that suffering for this. And thank you, Dr. Garner, for thinking about the cultural impact to endometriosis that people's different identifying cultures has.
Yeah.
It does give it a different lens. And thank you for
Correct.
recognizing it and for having me talk, even though I'm not like, a doctor or a medical professional, but I am a patient that, maybe I hope if a doctor's listening, a medical professional, they can think, I didn't think about that maybe my Latino patient might be
Yeah.
struggling with this, and maybe
Yeah.
that's why they don't want this treatment, or maybe that's why they're hesitant to do this. It's because of something cultural. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. And really it's, me thanking you for having the courage to be on. And because of that, I want everybody to know how to find you. So I know you have several different things happening. You have the Latinas Con Endo mission. Tell us about where we can find you. I know you're on Instagram, so just give us kind of a rundown.
Yeah, so if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me on Endo Cipota on Instagram. That's ENDOCIPOTA. You could join my WhatsApp group there. Well, we've turned it into the Latinas Con Endo WhatsApp group, and it's just a bunch of Latinas, but everybody's welcome. If you have endometriosis and you need community, come join us. We have monthly virtual chats. Sarah hosts some in-person ones in LA. You can follow the Latinas Con Endo Instagram to find out more about what events are coming up. There'll be educational ones as much as support ones. And yeah, I give a list of resources that I love. So Endo Girls blog for science-based facts. It's Rosemary, Philip, and Katie from Endo Girls blog made a fantastic course that you can take. It's free. That'll just teach you A to Z on endo. And I think education is such an important part of your own advocacy, is really learning about your disease so that you know when a doctor maybe is telling you something that doesn't sound great. And yeah, just you can find me on those places. I'm Natalie, and I'm always happy to talk. I will get on a phone call with you, and if you need Spanish, English, I got you. I'll speak to your parents. I'll speak to your cousin. Just reach out.
Amazing. Incredible. Incredible. Thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us today.
Thank you.